Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. And I want to say thank you to Tide for organising this event and also for inviting me just to share it. Now, there's a lot to get through. There's a lot of voices who need to be heard and want to be heard. So I've already said to the main contributors that I'm not going to be rude when I tell them to wheesht, but in order to get through everybody, I might need to move us on a little bit. I will try and do so as gently as possible. But I want to give everybody the chance to share their views and to have their questions answered if possible. Right at the start of this pandemic, I wrote a piece and I said that the way in which we responded to the pandemic would decide whether or not we were a society in Scotland which valued our older people, gave them voice and gave them place. I think the last experience of the last 9 months has given an answer to that question, and it's maybe not an answer that most of us are comfortable with, but we need to explore that. Today, we're focusing particularly around human rights and whether human rights has a distinctive contribution to make to the questions that we're asking and seeking answers for. But as Amanda has said, for so many on this call, if not the majority, the last 9 months have been times of real desolation, of torture and absence. They have been really painful. Many of us have lost individuals without being able to be present. Many of us have lost individuals in terms of the person that we knew at the start of the pandemic. So there's a lot of pain, and we need to uphold one another in that pain. It is not that one voice is more important than anybody else's voice. Today is about helping everybody have an opportunity to express their feelings and thoughts in as safe and secure a way as possible. But if we think about human rights in particular, at the start of the pandemic, I went on TV and radio and said that I believed that locking down care homes was entirely appropriate and safe and legitimate. From a human rights perspective, what we aimed was to try to achieve the greatest safety for the greatest number. At the beginning, that was, and I still believe, appropriate and entirely proportionate. It was the reasonable and right thing to do. As the weeks and months went by, that justification has diminished over time. And I think we're now at a stage that the level of restriction and limitation of visiting is, quite frankly, if not technically, legally, an abuse of human rights. It is very questionably on the margins of being a legal abuse. And Carlyn may want to reflect on that in a few moments' time. First of all, I want to underpin my belief, and it's always been my belief, that human rights are not about law. They're not about legislation alone. They are about a relationship. They were a set of frameworks which grew from a time in which humanity failed in its relationship to those who were most vulnerable. I think we are now in such a period, not just in Scotland, but across the world. We are failing to enable the fullness of relationship, especially for those who are most vulnerable, those who don't have a voice. And I think there are several ways in which that human rights failure is evidenced. The first is that we have almost created into a demigod practices around infection prevention and control. And just before I came on here, I saw on Twitter a statement whereby an organisation, and I don't know who this is, was planning to spray down visiting relatives with disinfectant. That reminded me of something. And it reminded me of a time of abhorrence in which a society considered the value of another to be so little, so insignificant, that it used inhumane treatment in order to develop an understanding of its own self and importance. So we've used infection prevention and control in a fundamentalistic way. We have adopted and utilised essentially acute sector-based infection measures and adopted them into a care home setting, which is essentially somebody's home. We've heard commentators who don't know about care homes, whether they're politicians, media, or the wider public, talk about institutions. Anybody involved in the care home sector knows that we have fought for decades to get away from the sense in which a care home is seen as an institution. So we need to question the way in which infection prevention and control has been abused in the last few months during this pandemic. Secondly, and in Scotland, we need to own up to the reality that there has been a real risk aversion within the care home sector. And that's not come from nowhere. In some instances, it's come from the desolation of losing far too many people who were known to staff. In other instances, it's come from a situation where politically it was decided to set up an investigation during a pandemic called Operation Copper, which has made care home providers fear litigation and fear criminal charges because of investigation from the police. I spoke to a provider last week who literally had attended the funeral of somebody who had died in phase 2, was still fighting phase 2, and the police walked in the door. That's created a culture of fear and has resulted in a risk aversion, which has done nothing to enable visiting to happen. I think the third thing is that we failed to prioritise older people sufficiently. And I've been on record as saying whether that has to do with do not resuscitate forms, death certificates being sent in bulk to care homes, guidance which appeared to suggest that you shouldn't leave the care home to go to hospital. And in Scotland, only 9% of those who have died of COVID in a hospital came from a care home. In England, that figure is 31%. Something rotten was going on there. And that was about the way in which we valued older people in society in general. We have, in too many instances, as a wider society, concentrated on economic livelihood and well-being rather than the quality of life. We have made the presumption that to keep people alive was first and foremost the most important thing, without recognizing that psychological, emotional connection, being with family, and the absence of that was what has resulted in deterioration and decline. And I have said it before, and I'm saying it again, we will have lost more people, not to the virus, but to our safeguards. Human rights, legally, morally, and in terms of what they say about relationship, has something to say to all those areas. So I'm now very pleased to invite Carlyn Miller from the British Institute of Human Rights, who's going to look at the restriction to visiting from a human rights lens. Carlyn.
Thank you very much, Donald. Okay, hope you'll see my slides. As Donald said, I'm Carlyn Miller. I'm the Policy and Programmes Manager at the British Institute of Human Rights. And just quickly, for anyone who doesn't know about us or who we are and what we do, we're a small charity based in London, but we work UK-wide. And we work in 4 main ways. So first of all, we support people with information on their rights so that they can use that information to advocate for change in their lives or their family members' lives or someone they love's life. We also work with communities, so geographical communities, as well as community groups of people to support them to use human rights law for change. We also work with systems, so providers, basically, public bodies, private bodies, those delivering a function of public nature to ensure that they are able to protect human rights in everything they do, and that they understand the accountability which sits with them under human rights law. And then finally, we also work at a policy level. So we're with people, communities and staff almost every day, hearing sort of what's happening on the ground, how perhaps a certain bit of legislation like the Coronavirus Act is actually impacting people and staff, and then we share that at a policy level, both at Westminster and Holyrood. So this is what I'm going to cover today. I tell you, this is possible to do this in 15 minutes, okay? Let's give it a go. I'll not go over time. I'm just setting my timer on my watch, actually. I'll do that now. So whistle stop tour, here we go. So we're going to try and cover what rights you're covered by in Scotland and who has the legal duty to uphold those rights. We're going to cover what rights could be at risk where there are visiting restrictions in place, then a couple of real life examples of human rights in practice, and then ending on some top tips to use human rights for change. So just quickly, I want to run through the headline points about human rights. I'd love to just move into practice examples, but it's good to just set the scene, I think. So human rights are more than values. They are based on agreed legal definitions, not moral compass or guidance. They're set down in law in Scotland through the Scotland Act, the Human Rights Act, the European Convention on Human Rights, which is a Council of Europe document, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is at UN level, and then the subsequent conventions, which you perhaps have heard of, like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, etc. So lots of different. Sorry, it said the host muted me. Was it going that badly? I'll try and just keep going. I've managed to unmute myself, I think. So that's the different bits of legislation which exist within Scotland. The Human Rights Act is the domestic legislation in Scotland. So it brings down the rights within the European Convention into our own domestic law. It also sets a legal duty on bodies delivering a function of public nature. So that's important. The legal duty is not just on the state or state bodies. It's on anyone delivering a public function. So that's health, care, education, support. It's not about the nature of the body, it's about the nature of the act. And if it is any of those things, like health, like care, they have a legal duty to uphold human rights, whether they're public or private bodies. That's as simple as I can kind of explain that, I think, at the moment. When difficult decisions are being made about a person's care, treatment or recovery, rights have to be respected, protected and fulfilled. And that's important. It's a three-part duty. So the duty to respect, so not to directly breach anyone's human rights, the duty to protect, so to step in and take action where a public body is aware that rights might be at stake, and fulfilled, which is a duty to properly investigate where something has went wrong. And that's the legal duty now. It was the legal duty before, and it will be the legal duty after this crisis. Crucially, final point is that some rights can be limited or restricted, but in order for that to happen, a three-stage test has to be met, and that's what we're going to sort of focus on today. This is a pyramid which shows how the Human Rights Act works. So you'll see the Human Rights Act on the bottom. A reminder that the Human Rights Act and the European Convention, they're identical. It's just about your legal remedy, whether that's within the UK through a Scottish court under the Human Rights Act, or in Strasbourg, the European Court. So Human Rights Act sits on the bottom. It's a foundation law, which means that all other legislation, policy, guidance and practice have to be compatible with human rights. Okay, so it's on the bottom. They have to be compliant. So whatever the law says should be compliant. And then whatever happens in practice should also be compliant with human rights. And that's important because it means that it's not possible to say, well, we're applying the Coronavirus Act here, so we've put human rights to the side, we've left them at the door. No, you can't do that. Human rights must be, all other legislation has to be applied compatibly, okay? Any policy, any practice. So these are the 16 rights within our Human Rights Act and within the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, if we were to think about which of these, are involved when there's restrictions on visiting, You could probably name a fair few of them. Right to life, restrictions on visiting, initially about protecting the right to life, making sure reasonable steps were taken to protect life. The right to liberty, so that's about restriction on movement. So definitely seeing that in terms of if people are within residential care and unable to move freely. Right to respect for private, family life, home and correspondence, definitely would be involved, and a right not to be discriminated against. So there are so many rights which are at stake here, and I have 15 minutes. So what I've done is I've chosen two, and I've chosen the two which have come up most often in my work during coronavirus. But before I move into just running through those two rights, this is crucial. So those are the 16 rights that we are all entitled to simply by virtue of being human, okay? Whether you're a person receiving care and support or whether you're a family member or a friend who is impacted by that service delivery, okay? So some of these rights are absolute, which means they can never be lawfully restricted. There'll never be any legal justification for restricting an absolute human right. Some of them are non-absolute, and that means that in certain circumstances, those rights could be restricted. But in order for that to happen, a test needs to be met. Now, I'm not going to be able to run through which of these are absolute and which of these are non-absolute, also because for some it's two-part. So some of them are wholly absolute, whereas others, like freedom of expression, for example, we all have the right to believe and think whatever we want. That's absolute. But we can't manifest that belief in a way that would harm someone else. So that part's non-absolute. So you kind of have to get to grips with the practical framework behind each. But this is a three-stage test for non-absolute rights, okay? So if a restriction is to be put in place for a non-absolute human right, it has to be lawful. So there must be a law which allows public officials or those delivering a public function to take that action. And importantly, for something to be lawful, all of those safeguards within that law needs to be met. So timescales for review, opportunity to challenge, things like the law has to be accessible to the person that it impacts. So all of these things which make something lawful, not just there being a law, it has to be applied lawfully as well. For a legitimate aim, so the restriction has to be about protecting that person or others from harm. That's it, that's the legitimate aim. It doesn't go much wider than that. Okay, so resources is not a legitimate aim in and of itself. Staffing levels are not a legitimate aim in and of themselves for restricting rights. But if you're able to evidence, I guess, that that is still about protecting someone from harm, it could be that there less availability of staff, so you're having to prioritize decisions to protect one person who's at greater risk from harm. So the legitimate aim, yes, it's complicated, but essentially has to be about protecting that person or others from harm. And then finally, and crucially, proportionate. So public officials must have thought about other things they could do. So it has to be the least restrictive option in place. And this is why blanket bans are very rarely human rights compliant, because that's not a proportionate response. It could be in certain specific circumstances, but there has
Carlyn,
to be.
You've gone into mute again.
Have I? It doesn't show that I'm on mute, so I don't know how to fix that.
No,
I can hear you still.
I can hear okay.
Yeah. I can hear you.
Okay. So sorry, I don't know what happened there. It's maybe my computer. So this is the three-stage test: lawful, legitimate, proportionate. Okay. Now let's put this into practice using two different rights. So we're going to look at Article 8, the right to private, family life, home and correspondence. And we're going to look at Article 3, the right not to be tortured or treated in an inhumane or degrading way. So usually I would do this interactively, but in the interest of time, let's look at Article 8 first, which is a non-absolute human right, okay? This right can be restricted in certain very specific circumstances. So these are the things that sit under Article 8. Your right to mental and physical well-being, your right to autonomy, so having a say over decisions which affect you or your life, participation in the community, that's kind of who you consider community, relationships with others, confidentiality, all come under private life. We all have a right to these things enshrined in law. So they're not just values or nice ideas, this is set out in law. domestically, regionally, internationally. Family life, so ongoing contact with family if split up. Home, that's not a right to housing, but it's a right to enjoyment of your current home. And then correspondence, which is not to have our correspondence interfered with, essentially. So all of these things we've seen sort of during COVID, and we've seen the impact on people and families. So should this right be restricted? Okay, so let's imagine a visiting policy which restricts these rights. It has to be lawful, legitimate, proportionate. Right, so I think I've kind of already run through this, so I'll not go through it again, but that's how you would challenge, I guess, a decision which was interfering with Article 8 rights, asking the questions: what law is being used to allow this to happen? Is this for a legitimate aim? And is this a proportionate response? And here's the story of Edna and Emily, which I think puts this into, it kind of explains this better than I can. So Edna's 83 and lives in residential care. The current COVID-19 visiting policies at the home mean no one can visit. This has been going on for 18 days so far because of a recent outbreak. Edna feels isolated and down, mental and physical well-being, and is missing her daughter Emily, who usually visits every day after work. Okay, contact with family relations. Emily contacts the home and explains that she believes her mum's Article 8 rights are at stake. She understands that this right can sometimes be restricted to protect Edna and others from harm, but Emily feels having no alternatives in place for contact is not the least restrictive option. There must be something else the home can do. The staff within the home arrange a meeting to agree alternatives they can put in place while they deal with the current outbreak to ensure that Article 8 is upheld. They then put in place a number of alternatives which are less restrictive and ensure the mental and physical well-being of residents, as well as their family life, their relationships with others, their participation in the community, and everything else that's covered under this right. So the staff have got together and decided, what can we do to make this less restrictive? Okay, so that's Article 8, and that's how that would work. And I'm sure there's lots of people on this call who, you know, there might be positive examples of where this has happened, and there may also be examples where this hasn't happened. But that's how that works in law. Now let's just quickly look at the right not to be tortured or treated in an inhumane or degrading way, which is Article 3. Now this is an absolute human right, okay? So this right can never be lawfully restricted. But because it's an absolute human right, the threshold is quite high. So the impact on a person or their family member has to be quite severe for this right to be kind of brought into discussions. So it's treatment which causes you serious mental or physical harm, which makes you feel frightened or worried, causes you a lot of pain, makes you feel worthless or hopeless, okay? What's inhumane or degrading, of course, would differ from person to person. And that's what I mean about blanket policies, in terms of, if you're applying a blanket policy, you need to look at the individual impact on each person that's under that policy. And that's why they're rarely human rights compliant, because for one person, the impact of that policy could look very different to for another person, okay? So for Edna and Emily, it could look very different than for another family, which we're just about to look at. So you have to think about the person involved, their age, their mental health, their capacity, their perhaps disability, gender, all the different things that makes us who we are, and why that might impact you worse and more severely than perhaps someone else for Article 3 to be brought into play. So this is Muriel and Robert, okay? I'm aware I've got 2 minutes. So on the 21st of July, Robert had quite a serious fall at home, and his wife Muriel called an ambulance. The ambulance arrived and Muriel was told she could not accompany Robert due to COVID rules. Robert, who's 79 and has dementia, was then in intensive care for 12 weeks, during which Muriel could not visit. She was given a daily update over the phone. On the 25th of October, Robert was discharged into residential care, and the care home that he moved into was locked down the following morning due to a positive test of COVID. It's now been 4 months. The couple have had no contact. Robert is too distressed to talk on the phone, and he's deteriorating both mentally and physically. And the thought that Muriel might not get to say goodbye keeps her awake at night. Muriel reaches out to a human rights organisation who advises her that based on the impact that this is having on Muriel and Robert, the couple's Article 3 rights might be at stake, and the restriction on your Article 3 rights is never lawful. Muriel uses a template letter raising the care home's legal duty under the Human Rights Act. The care home has since arranged for Muriel to be provided with full PPE so that she can visit Robert regularly, and they're looking into testing of certain visitors where Article 3 rights are at risk. The reason I've used these two different examples is to show you the difference of where someone's Article 8 rights is at stake, and that could potentially be lawful, legitimate and proportionate, but that test has to be evidenced, and you can challenge by asking that question. You know, I don't feel this is proportionate. I think you could do something differently here. So to support you to challenge those decisions. But then where we're looking at Article 3, where the treatment could amount to inhumane and degrading, where it has a very severe impact on that person or their family. For example, when someone's end of life, when someone's deteriorating mentally and physically, when there's been no contact because, you know, other things like phone perhaps not possible for that person. So on that individual basis, we could be looking at Article 3 here, and you could use that to challenge. So just with no time to spare, I don't think, but I'll just quickly read this. Raising a human rights issue, top tips. Use your human rights knowledge. First of all, think about, is this an absolute right or non-absolute right that's at stake? If it's an absolute right, raise it immediately and use human rights language. Let the body know. Or if you're working in it, if you are a staff member, then think about this. What can we do differently immediately now? Because we've identified that this is an absolute human right. If it's a non-absolute human right, again, thinking about, has this been met? Is it lawful? Is it legitimate? Is it proportionate? And then that's just issues, I guess, how you could raise it, but I'm sure that's kind of not new information. Record the impact the decision's having on the person, okay? So it's about thinking about how that's impacting them and their specific characteristics, I guess. Think about the response you might get and plan
Carlyn,
ahead.
you've gone quiet again.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm there. That's me done anyway. I just wanted to end on that final quote from Eleanor Roosevelt about where human rights begin. And what she says is that unless rights have meaning close to home in the small places, then they have little meaning anywhere. So that's me finished anyway. I think I've managed to do that in 16 minutes, and I hope that was useful for everyone. And I'll be here for another little while, but I can't stay for the whole session, I'm afraid. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you very much, Carlyn, for that. And that's been a really helpful setting the scene in terms of the human rights frameworks, legality and actions that people can take and where there are particular risks. And because you are absolutely impossible to stop, I'll let you go on a little bit. I might not be as generous with others, so don't take Carlyn's bad example. But thank you very much, Carlyn. And I know that if people have any questions, they can put them into the chat. Can I just remind everybody to put themselves on mute, and we'll try hopefully not to mute the next speaker. So I'm very pleased to invite Alison Leitch, who is a member of the Care Home Relatives Scotland group, who's going to share some of the work of the group in terms of its recent survey. Alison.
Thank you, Donald. I'm just going to hopefully share this. Yeah. My name's Alison. I'm one of the 5 core committee, if you like, of the group. My mum was diagnosed at 60 with Alzheimer's. She's now 74 and she's in a care home. The care home's been great in that it's kept free of the virus and been able to change with the guidelines every time they've been introduced. I was lucky enough to have 3 visits with touch, which were amazing, and then the care company reversed their decisions. I then asked for essential visits and that's been declined as well. So to the group, the aim of the group is really to bring together who have loved ones in nursing and residential homes. As you all know, since March we've been unable to see our loved ones, and we feel that that's a huge loss. We've always played a big part in them. The group was originally set up in August by Kathy Russell and Nancy Gillespie, who found each other on Twitter. We started in August and we were every day we were hearing stories on the group, heartbreaking stories, and we thought that we needed some way to quantify the stories and the experiences of people so that we could then present the data in a meaningful way to get the message across to the government and different organisations. The first survey that we did, there was a lot of learnings from it by leaving it open to free text, so that when you were trying to quantify it all, it was really quite difficult. So we ran a second one following the guidelines that were announced on the 12th of October to try and gauge what the results were. So from that survey, we had 347 respondents. 10% reported an improvement in visiting arrangements following the guidelines on the 12th of October, which was not much at all. 33% reported that their visiting arrangements had actually worsened following the guidelines, and only 7% had reported being able to have that important visit that included the touch. And that, I know that lots of us got our hopes up when the guidelines came out. 80% of the respondents had not had the enhanced garden visits, which again, that was really important. You know, people have more than one family members, and you know, we've all heard about the importance of having pets in, or young children. So that was quite sad to see. 22% of the respondents had not been given any explanation for why the visits had not been improved. 92 people had asked for essential visits. Again, the Jean Freeman had increased the definition for essential visits, but again, as of the 3rd of November, when we collated it all, only 20 people had this granted to them. For anybody that filled in the survey, we did have about 4 or 5 questions where it was open to free text, and we wanted to collate the personal impact statements. Now, there was 322 of those that repeatedly mentioned the guilt, stress, anxiety, depression, anger, helplessness, loneliness, brokenness, despair. And when we were collating this, anybody that's gone through those personal impact statements have really been deeply impacted by reading these things. And these surveys were presented to the government as well. Following a meeting with the Care Inspectorate, they were quite shocked at the blanket no approach that was being taken by some. So they asked us if we could run another survey that would give care home names and local authority details. So we had another mini survey open from the 19th to the 30th of November. And as I say, the aim of that was to try and get details of who was doing blanket bans or refusals, so that this could be fed back to the Care Inspectorate and they can contact those care homes directly. It is all anonymous. We don't take any personal details in the survey. We also wanted to be able to collect some details of positive examples, because we know there are a few care homes that are doing amazing things, and I know Jane's here, and you know, if we could do with Jane what we did with Dolly the sheep, the world would be a better place. So on that survey, we had 181 people complete it. The largest number of respondents was from the Greater Glasgow and Clyde area, which kind of makes sense because of the West of Scotland lockdown that's been in place since the 1st of September. They've never been able to progress to inside visits. So out of the respondents, 106 reported having been refused visits, which they deemed were against the 12th of October guidelines. 43% of those said that public health were responsible for refusing the visits. Repeatedly at the meetings that we haven't had anybody from public health attend those meetings, and that was a really useful figure to see the role that public health play, and hopefully we are making progress, and that we are going to have a meeting within the next week or two that somebody from public health is going to be attending, so that they can see they absolutely have a role to play in this. 18% had said that the decision to refuse visits was solely down to the care manager. We hear this regularly, often, that it's just a no, and there's no sense of appeal for families in that. The positive experiences that came through, we had really good things about the consultations with relatives, opening that up, good communication. Care homes going that extra mile and allowing for extra visits for special occasions, birthdays and anniversaries, and anybody that's in our group, you'll have seen pictures of those things happening. We've had care homes that have gone with the guidelines and had the unsupervised visits, which just give that sense of normality. You know, anybody that makes that decision to move a loved one into a care home, we're always told this is your mum's home, your mum's dad, your dad's granddad's. It's your home and it should be treated like a home. So it's nice to hear that some people are getting back to that. Some care homes have allowed the extra visits if slots are unused. Again, we hear that slots are going unused, and that breaks people's hearts to think that there's visits not getting used. Good regular communication with care homes and families really mean the world. Again, we hear from the other side that there's so many family members they can't possibly keep everybody updated, but just making sure that there is that regular communication that offers the relatives meetings, that's really crucial to this. And efforts, some care homes are really making an effort to make sure that, you know, as the weather's just getting colder and colder, rather than just have it restricted to the one designated visitor, to maintain as many family members are involved as possible. We see people going the extra miles, putting up sturdy fixtures outside, heaters being attached. So that is all positive. The less positive experiences, again, we constantly hear about poor communication. Some families find out through the newspapers or social media that there's been an outbreak. When questions are asked, we're told that they can't because of GDPR, data protection. We hear stories that visits are only allowed during working hours, which really restricts people that are working, or that visits are only at weekends, and we hear that they're booked up until the middle of January. Again, relating back to the manager's decisions, there's no sense of any appeal for relatives. Where do they go when they hear this? We feel that families and residents are left in the middle of this blame game culture. There's the government, local authority, social work, care inspectorate, care companies, care home managers, and there's much, and as well as the care companies that have their headquarters in England, they follow English rules. And we do feel that it's us that are left trying to fight our way through this sea of mud and treacle, it feels like at points, where it's, and we're the ones that are suffering, and it really shouldn't be this way. And just lastly, technology, there's mixed responses on this. Yes, it works for some people, and the announcement the other week that there was going to be more funding available for iPads. It would be nice if there was an appreciation there that iPads don't work for everybody. A lot of people in care homes have dementia. It causes distress. That then makes people feel that they just can't do it. We've had numerous instances that the calls go unanswered. Appointments have to be made for it. Then there's a backlog on that. Chargers are broken, iPads are broken, poor Wi-Fi. There's limitations on calls. They have to be booked. Again, yes, it's a great thing for being able to keep in touch in some respects, but it does cause a lot of problems for everybody, and it takes away from that person-centred approach. That is me. I don't know how I am on timing, but I'm happy to hand back.
You're as good as Carlyn was, Alison. Thank you very much, Alison. That's really helpful for everybody to see the latest research as well from the group. I'm now going to invite, we've got 3 contributions from Natasha, from Lucy and Kathy, who are each going to take some time to share their own carer stories. So can I ask Natasha to begin?
Hi, so my name is Natasha. I'm a member of Care Home Relative Scotland, and I'm part of the 5 of us that are like the steering group. I'm also a member of TIDE, and what TIDE has really instilled in me is that to make change, we have to really put out our lived experiences to learn from it. If we don't put out our lived experiences, then we're not going to be able to influence change and show that what's currently happening isn't working. So yeah, my mum was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease at the age of 56. A diagnosis of dementia under the age of 65 comes with a lot of challenges, and one of those is a lack of support on hand. As mum's dementia progressed and she could no longer be on her own, we as a family stepped up to ensure she was with someone 24/7, as the only support we could get was 2 days a week. As a family of working age, this wasn't always easy, but we did it as she was our mum, my dad's wife. Eventually, there came a time where mum's dementia stole her ability to communicate, and she was showing signs of distress. So we took her to hospital to ensure there wasn't anything seriously wrong with her, and we never brought her home after that hospital trip. Local authorities believed her needs could no longer be met at home and keep her safe, and she should move into a care home. Really, as a family, we weren't given a choice. So that was almost 3 years ago. The care home was fantastic. They really helped us feel that mum was safe and well looked after, so there was never any grievances there at all. So the care home really did help us do that transition very well. So to bring it all back to COVID, at the beginning when lockdown happened, yep, absolutely, as a family, we welcomed the fact that the care home had to go into lockdown to ensure mum's safety, because really no one knew what was going on. and my mum did indeed contract COVID in April, and she was in hospital for almost a month. My mum thankfully pulled through, but it's terrifying to think of how she must have felt being completely alone, not having any family members, not having any familiar faces around about her. And even when she got out of hospital, there was no contact from the hospital to the family to say she was going back to the care home, so we couldn't even be there as she was coming out of the ambulance. So there's that realisation again that the families were being really isolated from our loved ones in a care home, and the residents in care home are still being isolated from their families, and there wasn't that great communication. It was quite sad to think of my mum in hospital alone, not being able to communicate, and yeah, we just really worried about her. So as I say, she managed to pull through COVID, so I do understand how scary the risk of COVID is. Recently, my mum had a mini health scare, which has enabled us to use essential visitor status, in which me and my dad have been allowed in to see her. This is great, but it should never have taken for my mum to have health issues before she could be reconnected with her family. I still believe that we should be having at least a designated visitor before now. I know we're having the testing and come in place, but there's something should be put in place well before now to allow at least one designated visitor per resident, so that someone in a care home can be kept connected with their family. So it's great that me and my dad are getting in to see my mum. Not great on the circumstances that we're getting in, but we also have to recognise that my mum has 3 other children who are desperate to see her, and she has grandchildren, she has brothers, friends, so many people that used to visit her, and they are not being able to getting in to see her. So it's great that she has these 1 or 2 visits, but there's so many other people desperate to visit her. Now, as someone who's been allowed in a care home and in my mum's room with correct PPE, I honestly cannot see why this is not happening across the country. We have to stop looking at family members as a risk, but enabling safe visits and getting us back to being partners in care. We have to recognise that families are looking to protect our loved ones in care homes as well, and we will work with the care homes, go through all the PPE, the IPC control that they pass on to us, and we will follow the guidance given to us by the care homes. I genuinely feel that this needs to be rolled out faster by a lot of care homes, and the trust has to be given back that family members are going to follow these rules. When my mum moved into a care home, we were told to treat this like her home. That was the line that was given to us by the local authorities. I no longer believe this. If this was my mum's home, she would have been allowed indoor visits in summer like the rest of society. If this was my mum's home, she would be allowed garden visits, as much as these can be difficult, but she would be allowed garden visits as much as possible with her family, as she wants. If this was my mum's home, she would have been allowed to see her grandchildren in the flesh and not through a window. If this were my mum's home, she would be allowed to see her husband as often as possible, as they should be classed as a non-cohabiting couple. So yes, I no longer see this as my mum's home. I see it as somewhere local authorities placed my mum when they couldn't find any way to help us keep her at home. And bear in mind, most of mum's care was done by us as a family. My mum is a person with rights. I did not know her rights would have been lost the day she was taken from the family home and forced into a care home. We cannot continue to allow vulnerable residents to be isolated, and I never want to see a time again when families and residents have to go through this heartbreak. I hope for a future where we as families will always be seen as partners in care and use infection prevention control to enable us to stay connected. That's me. I went really quick.
Thank you very much, Natasha. That may have been, in your own words, quick, but it was powerful and personal, and I think everybody can resonate and feel your pain, but also your strength in this time. So thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to Lucy. Lucy, if you're there.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. Take it away, Lucy.
Hi, my name's Lucy. I'm a 22-year-old student. My mum's been in a care home for 4 years with ARBD, alcohol-related brain damage, and I also have another family member in a care home, my 98-year-old grandma, who's been in care since June this year. She's got Alzheimer's disease. Before I discuss how the restrictions have impacted my family, I will give you a bit of background. In 2007, my dad died from suicide. My mum developed a drinking problem and her health deteriorated rapidly. This led to me having to care for her at a young age. She became severely underweight and needed help with everyday tasks like having a shower. In 2016, she was admitted to hospital and diagnosed with alcohol-related brain damage, a cognitive impairment that affects memory, decision-making, mobility, among other things. After spending a year at an ARBD rehab facility, Mum was admitted to a care home aged 50. This was the last thing we wanted, but because her health was so bad and because she would likely drink again if she returned home, it was the only suitable option at the time. I became a kinship carer for my younger brother Jack, who's 3 years younger than me, and I became a joint guardian and power of attorney with local authority. So Mum has been in residential care for the last 4 years, and prior to coronavirus, I was regularly visiting her. Although we would have loved for her to be at home, full-time care was still the safest option, and because we could see each other regularly, we could deal with the situation. My grandma's also in a care home, and she went into care during the pandemic in June. Prior to her admission, she was meant to start a day centre, but due to COVID, it was closed. Her dementia worsened significantly. She was falling over a lot and was a danger to herself at her home. Unfortunately, a care home placement became the only suitable option for her. However, if the day centre had remained open and there was better community support available, this may not have been the case. The COVID restrictions have had a huge impact on my family. It's been very difficult for us. Despite my attempts to push for one, we have never been allowed an indoor visit with my mum's care home. This has been frustrating as it is often cold or wet outside. What makes things harder is the fact we've only been allowed 30 minutes for every week. It feels very unnatural and rushed. When did anybody meet a loved one for only 30 minutes? Normally, when I would visit Mum, I would stay for hours. This has been very difficult, actually impossible. It feels very unfair and unnatural to have one 30-minute slot with my mum. I completely understand there's a lot of anxiety among care homes and government about visitors letting the virus into homes. However, I still think it is very unfair on residents and relatives to have such tight restrictions in place, especially for when many residents, a visit from a loved one is the only thing they have to look forward to. Surely if the government had put greater priority on testing visitors, we could have been granted caregiver status and been able to have visits for longer times than indoors. I think it is essential this path is taken. While it's good news to hear about that the vaccine may be rolled out soon, I'm sure current visiting restrictions will remain in place for the time being, and residents will be unable to see loved ones properly. For me and my family, progress with visiting restrictions has been far too slow, and we are still at the same stage we were in March. The lack of time spent with my mum has been too difficult for us to cope with, and we don't have much faith in the vaccine being rolled out as quickly as it needs to be. We are fearful of being stuck in the same situation for a good few months more. This has pushed for me to decide Mum is going to move back home. While we are delighted she can come home, it does not come without its risks. It pushes a lot of responsibility on us to care for her, and she could be at risk of relapsing. However, as I've already said, it is a risk we would prefer to take compared to the current unfair and cruel visiting restrictions. If I was able to see my mum properly throughout the pandemic, I don't think I would have made the decision to move her home. At Grandma's care home, it's only been outdoor and window visits until very recently. We had our first indoor visit last week. The visits can be very upsetting and stressful, especially with the 30-minute time limit in place. Many times I've left visits and burst into tears on the way home with overwhelming feeling of guilt. My grandma can get very distressed at visits and told me at the last window visit she would rather be dead than in a care home. That's really upsetting to hear. Although I'm aware of the importance of protecting people in care homes, and the way restrictions have been applied have made my mum and grandma feel very isolated. I do not understand how testing is being rolled out in other areas very fast, but for care homes, it just feels like it's all too slow. Something needs to be done about this. Thanks. I don't know how long I took there.
No, you were perfect, Lucy, and thank you very much. And as everybody's saying in the chat, you have had an enormous amount of pain to have to endure, and to have only fragments of time to be in touch with your mother and grandmother will chime with an awful lot of people on this call. So thank you, Lucy, for the bravery in telling your story. And finally, in this section, I'm going to turn to Kathy Russell. And Kathy, as Alison has already explained, is one of the founders of the group. So Kathy, over to you.
Hi there, thanks. I'm quite upset listening to what everyone else has been saying this morning. I think I'll start by saying just a wee bit about my mum's journey to care, like the others, because I think one of the things that's come up in the group a few times is where people have said, well, why don't you take them out of care, or if it matters so much to you. But I don't think I've ever met anyone whose family member went into care without them having been through all of that, you know. And that was really our journey. I mean, I was been very, very close to my mother all my life, but particularly after my dad died very suddenly in 1994. And so we, sorry, I'll be fine. So at that point, then that she became very much part of my life. We went a lot of walking and so on. I think there are some pictures actually, if you want to. Can you show the one of the photographs, Rebecca? This is my mum and I on one of our trips away. We went a lot of walking. She was involved in a lot of walking groups. She was very fit and active. She actually was still climbing Munros, and then she was 80 years old. And I got her involved in a lot of different clubs, which meant she could go lots of holidays and so on. So we've always been very close, and we went from there to this is another picture. This was just taken exactly 2 years ago, and we were all in a holiday in Amalfi, and we had an absolutely brilliant time at a wedding, my mum's granddaughter's wedding, and this is my mum with some of her grandchildren, great grandchildren at the wedding. She has 9 great grandchildren. However, not long after we came back from that holiday, my mum had a very bad accident. She had a bad fall, and we got a call to say that she had was on from the alert alarm people to say that they reckoned she was on the floor, and so we went up there and found my mum on the floor, and she had to go to Queen Elizabeth's Hospital. It turned out she'd broken her back in 2 places. And so although we had a lot of care in place for my mum, you know, we had, you know, the Cordia people a few times a day. We had paid carers going in. I was going in after kind of 3 months in hospital and another while in another care setting, an intermediate unit. Basically, the advice I was given was that my mum could not live alone. She needed to be turned overnight. She was catheterised. It's just all the usual complications that come in when someone is completely no longer able to walk and doesn't have the cognitive ability to really get over that and to learn to do these things again. That just wasn't happening. So, however, when she moved into care last October, as both Natasha and Lucy have said, you know, we were told this was my mum's home. It was a very nice setting, we'd chosen with a lot of care. I think there's another photograph of us last November, Rebecca. Yeah, where my mum was already in the home by this time, but my brother and my sister were able to come back to Glasgow, and we all went out for lunch and everything. So we were still very much, I was finding life easier because I could spend a lot of time just sorting out my mum's drawers, and we would put on music and we would go out to cafes. You know, there was a lot we could do. It was take her down to the Transport Museum. We had a lot of fun. It was going well. However, we then had to set about getting our house sold to pay for it all. And on the 28th of we got the place squared up, 28th of February, we got our house sold. And a fortnight later, it was actually 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day was my last day in the home. So last time I set foot in the home was the 17th of March. And that was a terrific day as well, because we played lots of Irish music. My mum loves all that, and we had great fun. And so the next day when I was told, because I was already by then designated visitor, they'd already made it that there would only be one family member who could come to the home. But when I got the letter the next day, the email the next day to say that's it, you're locked out, I could hardly believe it. But I knew that there were a lot of problems with PPE and everything. I mean, that was all in the news, and we could see what had happened in Italy and what had happened elsewhere. So in some ways it wasn't that surprising, and you kind of accepted that, well, this is going to, it's going to be difficult, but maybe by the end of April or so on, then we'll get back in. However, when we went back to the, we could just move off the slides now, if you like. I think this might be the last one. So we then went to, thanks very much, Rebecca. So we then went into this phase where we weren't getting in it. There was nothing really, it was just video calls. And the rest of the family took up the video calls and they do use them, but I just refused. I said, I'm not speaking to my mother in a video call. So eventually it was agreed that I could go and sit at the window, and what I do is I try and speak to her through the phone. In fact, I think we've got a picture, another picture of me on one of these visits, which you'll all be familiar with. Have you got that, Rebecca, the video call one? Yeah, it's a, yeah, sorry. Yeah, this is really me going to see my mother now. That's what it's like nowadays. I haven't actually had an outdoor visit now since September. Since then, the home has more or less been perpetually in lockdown. So it is purely window visits since then. I think when in August, if I can just go on to what happened when we set up Care Home Relative Scotland, in August what happened was we got word when we started in July or August to see the kind of guidance come out. I realised there was absolutely no way any of that guidance, even at the best of it, was rubbish. It was nothing like what visiting someone in care is like. It didn't bear any relation. It was these very, very distanced visits where you're 2 and 3 metres away, where you're shouting to them. It's just, there was no stage in the visiting. I mean, I can't believe that MD actually wrote that original visiting guidance. So we then set up the group. A lot of people joined very quickly. We obviously just hit the right time. We then went to the Parliament and had a demonstration, and later that day I got a phone call from someone asking, just wanting to check they had the right contact details for me, because Jane Freeman had wanted to get in touch. And we met Jane Freeman for the first time on the Friday. I mean, that has led to some improvements in the sense that we got better guidance. But as you've seen from the information that Alison gave, we knew it wasn't making a big enough difference on the ground. It's been absolutely brutal. I mean, and the thing is that since we set up our group on the 12th of August, we've now had 3,508 care home residents have died in that time. Recently, people, even of the small, much smaller number, obviously, of people who are actually on our group, I'm getting messages, direct messages all the time from people whose loved ones have died just in the last few days. So I don't think that public health and the care homes and so on, I don't think people have really realised how time dependent this is, which is why when the announcement came out on the testing and so on, which was our one hope that if we got that in place, because we did have the PPE, there was a lot of different aspects of it that we could cover for getting to visit indoors, but it wasn't. It was when it came out last week in the visiting guidance, and we've seen it would be February before people would be getting testing for all of them. That it was just really upsetting, that because I know the impact of that now. I know that every week another 300 people are going to die, and another 300 families are going to carry that guilt of having been separated from their relatives since last March. Sometimes when we see the announcements in Parliament, we get really upset because it makes it sound, it creates an impression that there is visiting, that it is happening. And I know that there are a few good examples of that, and we'll hear them later. We will hear them today. There are some people that are doing really well, but the overwhelming majority are still really, really reluctant. So we're just hoping that with the new announcements today, which have really speeded up the visiting, the testing rather, that combination of the testing with that we hope that the vaccine as well might start to make an impression quite soon, certainly by January, that we will start to get some progress, and we will start to see things get a good bit better. Sorry, I have no idea. I'm rabbiting here. I have no idea of the time. I'm okay.
You're fine, Cathy.
I'm just bang on.
A couple of more minutes, that would be great.
But yeah, so we are, but I think as Natasha said, we've been here before. We thought things were looking optimistic, and today, after the meeting that we've had this morning, we think things are certainly looking better than they were yesterday. But we've been here before, and we will not know whether or not this is going to work until we actually see what's happening in the ground, until we know whether or not we're actually getting visits. I mean, I'd already been told there was no prospect of getting into the home until after the 25th of December, although possibly the announcement today on the 14 days will make that more likely if they do manage to get out of the outbreak that they've got at the moment. So that's really my story, and be very happy to answer questions and so on when we move on. Thanks very much. Okay.
Thank you, Cathy, and I think on behalf of everybody, I want to thank Natasha, Lucy and Cathy for those very personal stories, which I know resonate with so many people on this call and elsewhere. So thank you very much for being open and honest, despite the real pain that we know that you are daily experiencing. I'm going to turn now to Jane Douglas, Dr. Jane Douglas, who runs a couple of care homes in the Borders. And Jane has been engaged and involved in trying to make sure that visiting was maintained as much as possible. And she's going to share her story and her experience. Jane, hopefully you're here.
Yeah, hi Donald, hi everybody. Oh my goodness, I feel very sad actually, and emotional hearing your stories and your bravery as well. And I feel really saddened that this has not been working out in the way that we had hoped it would when the guidance was introduced. So just where we came from in Queen's QME Care, which is Queen's House, Murray House and Abanthia House, we shut down the same as every care home did back in March, at the beginning of March. I think it was just on the 15th of March was my birthday, and we shut the care home down. And at that time, it was all we had really was to stop the footfall. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were all frightened and anxious, and it's been one of the most anxiety-provoking times of my career. And anybody who thinks a care home manager's job is easy, it's the hardest thing in the world. It was hard before, but it's really hard now. So we shut the care home down like everybody else, but actually we didn't have any idea that it was going to be for 6, 7 months, 8 months, and for yourselves 9, 10 months. And I remember having a meeting with residents and relatives about this, and you know, everybody was okay, you know, if it worked and it's only going to be a few months. I remember one of my residents saying, if it's only going to be 6 weeks, 2 months, we can live with that. But you know, and she actually said, but we don't have that much time. So I remember her distinctly telling me that at a meeting. So they all and everybody went along with it, and everybody trusted us to do what we thought was right. And but it went on for too long, and my anxiety shifted from COVID-19 coming into the care home to the well-being of the residents and the relatives, because I think I'm responsible for the network of people who are part of this community, and that is the staff, it's the relatives and the residents. It isn't just my staff group, and it isn't just the residents. I was involved in the visiting guidance, and we were anxious to get that published, and I think, you know, it said it was going to get published and then it didn't get published. And we we went forward and we took it forward. It was the outside visits initially, but everybody was really keen to get indoor visits started, and everybody was keen to ensure that those visits were meaningful. And as soon as the enhanced guidance came out, we adapted it to what we thought we could do, which was definitely have our indoor visits. We've always had essential visits, but not as much as we have now, and we do have people who come in much more regularly as an essential visitor. So what did we do? So we looked at we had a meeting when the enhanced visiting came out. We've got a safety group. We got the safety group together and we talked about how we could ensure the utmost safety of residents, relatives and staff if we were to open the doors to increase visiting and enhance visiting. And we sent our relatives out our training that we all did for IPC. We sent them the donning and doffing videos. We asked for gowns and got them from our local NHS team. And we also had laminated cards for relatives. And we have a role, a concierge role, which we already had to assist with visiting. And that person meets and greets and organises all the visits, does the escorting and cleans the room afterwards and helps and be that one person that visitors and relatives can actually speak to about visiting. And I think one of the safest things for us is that we asked the relatives if they would wear these gowns, similar to what you would wear in theatre. And the reason for that is that we all get changed when we come into work because we don't want to come in our outdoor clothes, we're not allowed to. And we thought this would be the safest way of enabling a resident to be in a room and move around that room freely. We do enable our relatives to engage in touch and assist where they want to assist with the care of their loved one. And we feel that we have ensured that we're safe in doing that through strict IPC and the strict wearing of PPE and the full PPE. Now, we haven't, and I really, really say this with caution, we haven't had COVID in our care homes. I'm always cautious, it's a day at a time. But we also have a care home that is all on one level. We don't have any upstairs, so we have no list to negotiate. They're all on one level, and a lot of the rooms have got patio doors. So all the rooms in the new buildings have got patio doors, and some of the rooms in the older building, which is 20 years old, have got patio doors. So all visits take place now in the rooms where possible, and they go through their patio doors, and if not, they go through the fire door that's nearest to their relative's room. So we're stopping the footfall coming through the home. And I suppose for me, we ensure that visit is private. We have one of my relatives suggested that we put something on the door, so they've got a little door sign that visit in progress. We may pop in just to check everything's okay, but actually we believe that visit has to be meaningful. It's your right as the relative to have that time with your loved one, and that should be a meaningful visit without us intruding in on that. I believe we have to have trust. We have a strong relatives group. They're supportive of what we're doing, but we are also guided by them, and we listen to them. We listen to how they feel, and their stories were not dissimilar. You know, they were desperate to come and see the loved one, to touch the loved one, to give that loved one a hug. Now, I have been questioned about the hugging by our health protection team. I got a telephone call, they were worried about it. I explained that we ensure that everybody's in full PPE, that we feel that it's safe. People aren't going around cuddling and kissing, but you know, a quick hug we don't feel would be an issue. And they assured me that they were okay with what we were doing because of the PPE that people were wearing and the way we had gone about our visiting. So I was assured about that. But I also did speak to Claire Kilpatrick about the hugging, and she works, she is an infection control specialist, and she also said that hugging, in her view, was safe. I think that care homes are scared, and I think they are anxious. Ultimately, it's the registered manager's responsibility to ensure that safe visiting takes place. And I think that some managers may be prevented from enabling visits to take place because I think they are directed by their bosses. And now I was asked to speak to the commissioners and some of the managers in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. And I did that just to talk about what we're doing here in the borders. And I talked about the anxiety of the manager and being the manager and making those decisions. And I do think sometimes it may not be the manager who's making that decision. I think maybe it might be higher up the tree, so to speak. And not that I believe in hierarchies, but just if you work in a big organisation, you will have directors that might direct you not to do something. I'm not saying that's happening, I don't know. I am also aware that people have COVID in their care homes, and I'm also aware that care homes, some of the care homes are very complex buildings because they're old buildings, and it might not be as easy to maintain that safe flow through the building. So I accept that, but I also accept that there is a solution to everything. And I really enjoyed that talk about human rights, because I believe it is everybody's human right to have contact with their family. And I think we did it for too long. I feel that we were sticking to the guidance. We said we were sticking to the guidance. I would say I'm following the guidance. So we need to continue to follow the guidance. We can't pick and choose when we follow the guidance and when we don't. I think we have to give confidence to and enable confidence in the sector. I think that people are hanging out for the testing. And whilst this is brilliant, and I'm really pleased that it's going to be introduced before Christmas, there's a lot of work involved in the testing. And secondly, it's just one other thing that can assure us. It's similar, you know, so our staff get tested every week, and they can, we feel that that's an assurance that our staff are COVID free, but the test is only as good as the day it's done for our staff, and they only get done once a week, whereas at least the visitors will be done on the day they're visiting, which will be a great assurance. And there should be no excuses at all. If you are getting tested and you have a negative test on the day of your visit, there should be no excuses why you can't go into that building. You know, and I really, really hope you're not faced with anything like that. So we have talked about what we're doing here. We did an article. We were approached actually by the Sunday Mail to talk about what we're doing. And one of my relatives, and I think she's here actually, I think she's attending, she was filmed and took part in a you know, for an STV cover on visiting in care homes. And I think we are showing that it can be done safely. And what I would say is, if you're an essential visitor, whether your care home has COVID or not, you will still be allowed in your care home. That if you've been nominated as an essential visitor, and you are essential visitors, then especially, you know, you people who are so close to your family and your mothers who have dementia will be missing you so much. So for me, I think you are essential visitors, and I do think that people don't understand the difference between essential visitor and a designated visitor. And they talk about end-of-life care, but an essential visit is not about end-of-life care. End-of-life visits are end-of-life visits. So I really think that there needs to be clarity out there in the definitions. There needs to be support for the care home managers, because they will be very, very anxious, particularly if they've had COVID. And I think there needs to be trust in that group of residents and relatives that you more than anybody wants to ensure that your relative, sorry, you call them your resident, your relative is safe. You're not going to do anything. You're not going to do anything to harm your loved one. And yes, I agree. There's a message there about risk. You know, I have been informed by the groups that I'm on, and maybe this is why I've got the confidence, that relatives are not going to pose a risk to COVID coming into the home. We have 135 staff coming through our care homes. You know, I can't control what anybody does when they leave here. I trust them and they're very good, but actually you can only trust people as much as you can and believe what they're telling you. So, you know, your residents are seeing probably, well, in our care home, we have a very consistent group of staff, so they will only be, and we split them into teams, and they only work in clusters, so that the residents are only seeing a few of them. But they will see at least 20 people in a week. So I can't see how having a designated visitor or an essential visitor could pose any more risk. So I don't know how we can support managers to enable visiting, but I will help where I can to talk to people if they feel that would be helpful. That's all I can do really, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Jane. And having been at many sessions with Jane, I can certainly underline that Jane is a very powerful, articulate advocate of a different way of doing things. And she is certainly one person who lives up to her standing as one of the Queen's nurses in Scotland. So thank you, Jane. I'm now going to move us on to a question and answer session, and I haven't a Scooby as to how we're going to do this, and I've been told in my notes to hand over to Amanda. So Amanda, I'm handing over to you.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Donald. So yeah, this is a section where we just want to give everyone the opportunity to post some questions to any of our panel members who have spoken today already. So if you haven't already given us a question ahead of time, if you want to pop a question into the chat box, we'll try and get through as many as we can. And as I said earlier, we want to save all the questions that we have and collate them together and present them to government as well to get some real answers for everyone on your behalf. So I'm just going to start off with a few questions that we've already had ahead of time, just to kind of kick off the conversation. And one of them was from someone who let us know about a study that they had found that had already happened in the Netherlands, where they had allowed visitors back into care homes, and that they had found that there was no evidence to show that COVID infections had increased due to families being in the care home, and that there was a huge amount of positive results and impact on the carers and the family members being allowed back into the care home. And they've also stated that the Nursing Times in October had published an open letter from Infection Prevention and Control backed by over 60 experts in the field, calling for urgent action to end the incorrect and disproportionate application of infection prevention and control. So their question really is, and anyone in the panel can answer this if they can, is why are we so far behind those who are making these decisions on care homes based on this research that's coming through? Why are we taking such a long time to act on anything? If anyone wants to take that.
I'd be quite happy to say a wee bit. I mean, I think one of the things that happened was that just at the point where we got the guidance, the better guidance came out, it coincided. I mean, I think we were behind, we were very much behind where we should have been. I mean, I think looking back in it, if we ever, I think we should have had the earlier guidance out much earlier. I think we should have been moving to that stage earlier in the summer. I mean, I think of all the days that I was boiling and sitting outside a window looking at my mother stuck indoors, and I'm saying, could you not let her come out? So I think we should have had the visiting established much earlier. And there's also the SAGE report, which also showed that that visitors were a kind of minimal risk. But I think looking back in it, what has happened is that the publication of the guidance coincided with quite a sharp rise in the community numbers, and that really frightened the horses. I think if we had got that 4 weeks earlier, we might have been in a better position. But I think the timing really didn't help us.
Yeah,
I'm sure Donald will have other things to say on that.
yeah.
No, sorry, Amanda, I agree completely with Kathy. I think we took too long to get the guidance out. I think that if we can use Holland as an example, because I'm aware of that paper, Holland had testing sorted out. They really did. They had capacity. They were testing citizens significantly earlier. And, and I know there was issues of capacity. Lots of us were arguing. I remember on the 13th of March saying it was crazy that was the day that we locked down care homes and the very day that we stopped testing nationally because we didn't have enough capacity. So Holland was in a better position because it had testing. We delayed testing, or let's be honest, we prioritised our group before we prioritised care home residents. We thought, and I say this as the parent of a very young child who's at primary school, we prioritised getting children back to school and testing mechanisms around students before we prioritised those who had less of a life to live, because we assumed as a society that their life had already been lived. And let's strip it away. Failures around testing, failures of prioritisation, delays in the publication of guidance which had already been complete, obsession now with the IPC standards, which, I've said earlier, are just a nonsense. So I'll stop riding my hobby horse and let somebody else.
That's okay. Does anyone else?
Sorry, do you mind if I just come in here? Because it was me that actually asked that question.
Yes, yeah.
About the study. So, yeah, I mean, I've been looking at a lot of kind of research, robust research, or as robust as it can be, given that we haven't had such a long time. But I mean, that study is from, you know, high impact factor. It's good research, you know, and the references for that are all from, you know, well influential studies. And all of them are all, you know, advocating that, you know, visitor relatives should be in, they should be given, you know, not even the testing, you know, a lot of them haven't been doing the testing. It's been just your, you know, your proper PPE. I just find that utterly bizarre that we are still here 9 months down the line. Why are we not looking at this research? Why is that not being, do you know, sorry, do you want to do you want to come in?
Hi, sorry, can I pop in here? It's Sheila Hall speaking.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm one of the members of Care Home Relatives Scotland, and it's just, I've got notes down here because I'm summarising at the end of this meeting. And can I just say that I'm currently working with the 2 authors from the Nursing Times letter. And we know about the Dutch study, there's other studies as well. And my summarising at the end is exactly what the previous lady was saying, that there's absolutely no reason we should not forget testing, forget vaccines, that IPC, infection prevention control, should be an enabler for us to get in. And we're working so hard. Literally, the people that I'm working with are experts at the World Health Organization, and we've got their graphics people on board. We're literally about to produce a document to put on any table that will look at it, if that's any help.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And you both raised a really good point. And following on from that, we had another question that came in from a lady who lives in Orkney, and she described the restrictions there as almost bereavement-like for her. And her question is, and this is again following on from what Carlyn was talking about earlier on in terms of human rights and how this kind of blanket approach isn't really upholding people's human rights, and that each people, you know, everyone's individual. So if you look at the way that the tier systems are working, this lady's explaining that Orkney are in tier 1 with very low COVID cases. So why was it not possible to give relatives up there key worker status for testing and also access to care homes when they were in a relatively low tier anyway? So why did we have this blanket approach across the full of Scotland when obviously different areas had different levels of COVID cases? So would anybody like to comment on that?
I'll state the obvious, Amanda. I mean, I lived in Orkney for 18 months. I know Orkney really well, and I know the rates there. I cannot fathom Orkney. Shetland's are slightly different because they've had a number of really, a couple of serious outbreaks. We failed to do risk assessment at local level. We're now talking about that, and something's being developed. But a blanket ban, whether it's a blanket ban decision taken by a care home group, which doesn't take account of local outbreaks and local transmission of the of the virus, or whether it's a blanket ban by public health or government, is inexplicable. It might have been appropriate at the beginning. I said that I thought it was appropriate at the beginning because we all knew what we saw on the TV in terms of Spain and Italy. It ceased to be appropriate at least in June. But we've not done anything. And when I mentioned testing earlier, I wasn't meaning the Dutch were testing family going into care homes. The Dutch had testing in the community, so they managed transmission in the community much better. Thanks, Amanda.
No problem. And following on from Jane, when you were talking about what you've done in your care home, a lot of people were saying in the chat box that you were a breath of fresh air and that lots of people should be following your example. And so 2 kind of questions here for the panel is, how can we help care homes feel more confident? Because obviously, Jane, you said you feel confident and you've taken those measures based on the guidance there. So how can we make more care homes feel confident in doing that? And also, how do we share your good practice, Jane? Because if we weren't on this call today, would we know that you're doing that? So it's not a widespread. The government are not giving us opportunities to find out how people are actually managing it. And surely if we were able to share that good practice, that would maybe help other care homes feel confident. So how can we get better at doing that?
I think when I was speaking to the Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire managers, they were the commissioners and some of the, I didn't know the exact titles, but they were speaking with me because, and one of them was from social work, because they wanted to know why I did feel confident. And I think partly because I've been part of the group, so Graham Ellis is on, and I think listening to him and what he talks about has enabled me to feel confident. I also trust in the methodology. You know, nursing is an art and it's a science, and the science side is the PPE and the infection prevention and control. So if the PPE and the infection prevention and control is good enough for our staff to prevent us cross-contaminating people, if it's good enough to be used in theatre when I'm having open heart surgery, then it has to be good enough for relatives to come in and see their loved ones. So I think we have to, you know, as nurses, we're supposed to be evidence-based, so we should be understanding the evidence and utilising that. And I think managers need to be assured by their managers and by the public health teams that whatever they do, as long as they've got their risk assessments in place and they're doing their audits, they're doing their risk assessments, they're doing their safety huddles, then actually they've done everything they possibly can to mitigate against COVID coming in. I have a really good relationship with our health protection team, and you know, they'll phone me if they, you know, they were a bit concerned about the hug thing, but we had a general conversation and they're fine with that. They've actually said that our designated visitors can have 2 visits a week, because as long as we manage it the way we're managing it, if people want to do that. So that's not even the essential visitors. And I think it's about having that communication, but managers need to be given that confidence and that assurance, because I think they were probably left on their own and they're frightened around what will happen to them if COVID comes into the care home. Now, COVID can come into my care home, and it could potentially come in, of course it can, but it won't be because I've done something wrong, and it won't be because I let relatives in.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I say something? I think that there's a lot of care homes might not have confidence as well, because specifically during summertime, for when we were all allowed to go and visit each other inside our friends and family's house, that never happened for the care homes, because families were still getting treated as a risk. So I think that's been instilled from then, and it's not really, nothing's happened to help the care homes feel that letting us in isn't a risk. And then the fact that the guidance that was then brought out to allow visiting to happen inside happened come autumn and winter time, when we already know that the likes of norovirus and colds and flus and stuff that's quite high within care homes at that point. That's when the guidance was brought in that family members can go into the care home. And I think that has definitely caused some, I don't know what word to use, but not concern, but I can understand why care home managers were not really happy with that guidance that came out, because we should have been opening up guidance back in the summer when our rates were low, and it did seem, looking back, that it would have been safer to open up guidance visiting for indoor visits then, and we could have hopefully shown that it can be done. I would have had maybe some more examples of it. So I think it is, again, the delay of helping the care homes with the correct guidance, and almost feeling as if we have been left behind compared to the rest of society. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah, I think that's not really helped the confidence of care homes.
Yeah. And I think someone else there mentioned the chat box, could we not make Jane's talk available? And I think one of the things is, well, one of the things I would advise, and this is what we advise to our carers all the time, is to find ways to open up these conversations. So as I said, this has been recorded today, so you'll be able to access that. And if you think it might be a way for you to open up a conversation to ask the care homes that you're working with or that you are dealing with to look at this just in its entirety and see it right across the board, because I think it's good to get that balanced view from across everyone's viewpoint, then that might be a good way to open up the conversation. And it's been something that's been suggested to us again about going forward. How do we help care homes get more confident. And for me, one of those ways is for them to work together with families, because I think, again, we're waiting on, you know, all this kind of guidance and support coming in, but actually families are there. And I've spoken to many of you who've said you'd absolutely be happy to help out with organising, if it was rotas for people to get in, if it was, you know, helping to organise things in the care home, because again, a lot of worries around about staff capacity and time to be able to do that. So many carers have told me they'd be happy to do that. And I think it's about working together with families to try and help to kind of break down those barriers that exist at the moment. One other question that's come up at the moment, which I think I'd like to ask the carers and the relatives on our panel today, is about the lasting impact on your mental health and also the people that you care for. So that's what I really kind of talked about in my opening of today's event. What kind of impact is this going to have? I mean, long after we get the vaccine, hopefully, and things start to return to some kind of normal, what's the impact that this has had on you? We've seen today from your testimonies, but what do you think about what support will you need going forward in terms of that?
Sorry, I'll speak there. I think for me personally, here we go, I can feel myself melt up. I can definitely sense that I have maybe the past like 6-7 months have withdrawn from a lot of conversations, messages and all sorts with my friends. Obviously we can't see each other properly, but I can definitely sense that I've withdrawn a lot, because you find it hard to relate to what your friends are going through, and you can sometimes feel really angry and jealous that they seem to be having a really different COVID experience, and it can be really quite upsetting knowing that a lot of your other friends can go for a socially distant walk in the park with their mum, and we can't even get garden visits for most people or window visits for most people. My brothers and sisters can't even get inside like I can. So I think definitely it's made me withdraw a bit more, and probably sometimes in a bad way I can find myself being resentful, and I don't like that kind of trait has come out in me, and I never ever felt like that before all the restrictions were put in place for care homes. And I think sometimes it just hits you when you don't know it. I had a return to work Zoom call in September, I think it was, and with all the management team, and the big manager was like, right, we're going to go around all the managers and get ready to say hi to the group. Came to me and I just burst into tears in front of all the staff in my building. Didn't know where it came from. So it's those type of things as well, where you don't realise it's having an effect on you, and then all of a sudden you just feel like an overall consumption of sadness. So yeah, without a doubt, it's had effects on me personally, and it will have had effect on everybody with someone in a care home, I think.
Thank you for being so honest about that. Kathy, you've raised your hand. Do you want to come in here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sometimes I think I'm going completely crazy, and I do have, I think the sleeplessness, the kind of fact that I don't think I've had a night's sleep. I have to listen to podcasts all night since March, because if I don't do that, then I just start thinking about my mother and how she's wondering where I am at the moment. But I think I wouldn't underestimate. I mean, what I always try to think about is that it's really hard for everyone. And if I imagine that it's hard for me with my mum in a care home, I imagine what it would be like if I had her here trying to look after her 24/7. And I know that would be poorly supported, and I wouldn't be doing too well then either. And I think that a lot of people have their different COVID challenges, whether it's people with sons and daughters abroad that they can no longer know that they could go and see if there was any emergencies, or that type of thing. So I think I try to set it in perspective, and also through the group, I've met so many people who, I think what's really helped me is that my mum's actually remained reasonably happy. When I see her, she's always gives me a smile. She always seems quite content. I haven't gone through the stresses. I know quite a lot of members, some of it on today, have, where their relatives have been really, really, really distressed. So I think that has definitely helped as well. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again for being honest with us. And I think that there's a lot of people in the chat box who are part of your group who've said that is one of the reasons that they've been able to keep going, and it's helped them to be part of that and connect with people who understand what they're going through. I'm conscious of time, and I wish we had a lot more time to do more questions, but if anyone's got any other questions as we come to the end of the session, if you put them in the chat box, we'll make sure that we try and get some answers for you with that. But I just want to say that for us, the impact that it has on you as carers is what we do, and it's why we're here at Tide. So that won't be something that's forgotten easily by us, and lots of carers tell us that they feel they're forgotten and that they're isolated and they don't have a voice, and that's what we're here to do. And we'll talk to you near the end about what else we're going to do as an organisation to help that, but we will definitely 100%, as a promise to all of you here, that we'll make sure that people know about the impact it's had on you and we get some support for you going forward, because it's really important that we do that. I'd just like to hand back to Donald for the rest of the session now. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you, Amanda, and you are absolutely on time. You're just showing off now. I'll try and manage this better in the time that remains, but without further ado, we've already heard a little bit from Sheila Hall from the Care Home Relatives Group about some of the work that she's doing. So I'm going to hand over to Sheila to talk about the group's call to action.
Thank you, Donald. And yeah, as I mentioned briefly, I'm a member of the group. My mum is 95, soon to be 96, and basically giving up the will to live at the moment until I can get in to see her. Kathy was my saving grace. We met really quite coincidentally at the very beginning of her setting up the Care Home Relatives Scotland group, and I have utmost admiration for her and the way that she's leading the group forward. And my involvement in the group has kept me sane. That's been my saving grace. So when I was asked to speak, I should say my background is in nursing. So what Jane is talking about resonates greatly with me. And when I saw that the title of my summary was called Call to Action, I thought, crikey, that sounds a bit like the army. And then I thought, well, do you know what? That's what we're doing. We're fighting this virus, and it's an unknown virus. And actually, the care home managers have been put at the front of this action without asking to be put there, and responsible not only for their staff, but for their residents. And they've been stuck at the front of the action without any training. And I mean, I feel many care home managers don't have a nursing background, which certainly helps. So I can understand why they're struggling. And somebody mentioned in the chat that they felt there was a total lack of communication between the different bodies. And since the very first meeting that we had with the government on the 18th of September, I can hear the echoes of me standing up saying, there's no communication, there's complete lack of communication. And it's like Chinese whispers from the generals at the top who are sitting at the polished tables writing their guidelines. By the time it gets filtered down to the grassroots, i.e. the residents and ourselves, it's mixed messages, it's confusion, it's lack of understanding. And I'm afraid that's still in place, although at our meeting today with the First Minister, she's keen to get a big focus group together, bringing all the bodies together, which will be so helpful. So at the start, Dr. Macaskill talked about infection prevention control and the abuse of that kind of phrase, and that it's being used and considered as a barrier to our access to our loved ones. And I certainly struggled through the first few months of lockdown. And then when that Nursing Times letter appeared, Nursing Times is a very well-respected journal in the nursing and medical world. And this was the letter that was written by Julie Storr, was like a beacon of light. It was suddenly, yes, somebody has got common sense. We can work with this using infection control. Now, coincidentally, it turned out that I know one of the co-authors of this article, so I feel really honoured to be working with them. And Julie herself is an international expert in infection and prevention, and for 15 years has worked as an advisor and expert within multiple World Health Organization programs, including Ebola. So come on, she knows what she's talking about. And the letter was endorsed by numerous experts. And what I'd like to do is, just for anyone that hasn't seen the article, I'm just going to quickly go through the 5 key summary points, which I just think are so important. So what she's saying is the rules of infection prevention and control do not and should not prevent family members and close friends of residents entering a home even during lockdown. Infection prevention and control should be used as an enabler and supporter of safe entry to homes. The longer the current situation prevails, the more likely it is to be made routine and could soon become a concern in the future. So basically, the window visits, the pods, the outdoor visits become the norm. We can't let that happen. Infection prevention and control and compassionate care are not mutually exclusive. In summary, infection prevention and control should be applied as a force for good. So with all that in mind, I sound as if I'm giving a church sermon here, but with all that in mind, what we're doing at the moment, the Care Home Relative Scotland group and Julie and Claire Kilpatrick and the World Health Organization experts, we're trying to put together a document to present to anyone that will listen, to public health, to government, to care home managers, anyone that wants to see it, using common sense PPE measures, infection prevention control, and yes, okay, it's helpful, we've got extra troops coming on board for this battle, we've got the vaccine, we've got the testing hopefully coming on board, but we know logistically this is going to be so hard. But you know what? Doesn't matter, because we've got this solid foundation that if we make the argument that with good PPE, good infection control, used diligently and properly and trust, then it's not rocket science. So that's what I'm going to finish on with. My call to action is, let's get behind common sense PPE, infection control, and get this designated visitor status in place. And yeah, so that's my message. Let's go out on a positive note.
I think everybody would completely agree with you, and it is common sense and it's solid, scientific, sound. So thank you for that. And I'm going to hand over to Linda Gill, who's the carer involvement lead from Tide, who's going to talk about some next steps for carers from Tide. Linda.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I want to just talk us through just a little bit more. Tide has been mentioned all throughout today. And this session, really, this 5-minute session here, I'm aiming this very much at those who are the carers, the family and friends carers, and just talk about some of the next steps that you might be able to take after this session today. So our focus and our energy is very much on the carer, and we look to be alongside you and to ensure that you feel you have a way of being heard in the midst of everything that we've heard about today. There's quite a range of things that go on at Tide. This tube map image shows you just all of it, but today we're just going to focus in on some that are very specific and related to our situation here. So the 3 ways that we believe that Tide would be able to help you is, first of all, connection. The carers family group that's already established on Facebook shows the value of getting together and connecting with others in the same situation. Increasing and building that confidence as a carer to take you through some of our online learning and to enable you to play your part in influencing through using that lived experience that you've gone through. So in practice, what does that mean? So connecting with carers, we have lots of ways in which you would be able to take part of that as a member of Tide. Zoom coffee mornings with carers across Scotland, with one that we have which is for all 4 nations as well. Once a quarter we get everyone together, and then we have focus groups, and you'll see in there that one of those is actually bringing together carers of those who have family or friends in residential care, and they meet monthly again via Zoom. We also have online learning sessions, and the 2 in particular that from everything that's been shared in the chat box today and the conversation that's been held, getting your point across. It's a 1-hour online learning session where we'll help you with tips, techniques and ideas and suggestions, strategies for how to have your voice heard, how to get your point over. And then also Amanda leads on our living grief and bereavement sessions as well, which will resonate, I'm sure, with many of you. In terms of influencing policy, there's lots of ways. We've signed petitions and you know, we've heard today all the good work that's going on. But also, you know, very, very quickly, the session today is called Locked In or Locked Out, who has the key, but before we know it, it could very easily become something that happened in the past and potentially swept under the carpet. So what we're inviting you to do is to be part of what we'd like to do is to create a written record of these times and ask you to share your lived experience, pretty much the way many of you have already done as part of that valuable Facebook group that you're part of. What Tide will do from there is we'll produce a physical and a digital book as a record of all the lived experiences that you've shared. And there's potential. We're working also on looking to make that into a short film to help us tell the story, and then an event where we'll host the dedication so that we can be reflective and thinking about everyone who's dedicated within the book. So if these are things that are sounding interesting, then there's straightforward steps for you to take would be to come and have a look at our website. You register there, we'll make sure that you hear regularly from us what's going on, and just let us know which of these things appeal to you and that you might like to take part in. These slides will be shared with you afterwards as well. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you, Linda. And to finish, I think everybody here will have felt to be a very rewarding but challenging and painful afternoon. I'm going to hand over to Amanda, who I've known long enough to know that she always has the last word, even without a microphone.
Yes, thank you, Donald. I just want to say thank you to you, firstly, Donald, for being a fabulous chair for our event and always supporting us in everything that we do. So thank you very much for that. And I also want to thank each and every one of our speakers today, especially our family carers, who it takes a huge amount of vulnerability to put yourself out there and talk about those really personal stories. So thank you very much for doing that. And thank you to all of you who've attended today, who've been tweeting and who will take this forward. It's really important for us to take this information, to take these stories, to remember these people as you go away today, and in whatever way you can, try and influence and help to make this better for everyone going forward. As I said, we're going to we've recorded the full entire session today, so you will all get a link to the session in the next couple of days. And as I said, we'll be collecting all of the comments, all of the questions, and all of the ideas that you have, and we'll be putting them together in a report from today's session, and we will be making sure that the relevant people have access to this as well. So once again, thank you everyone for coming along, and I hope to see all of you again soon. And please remember to visit our website if you want to join our network. It's free of charge and we'd be really happy to see you there. So thank you everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.